I want to talk a moment about the idea of war. There are two kinds of war that are described in the Torah. One is a mitzvah, war which is definitive, that has been set out for us because of certain inherent realities on the scene, coming into Israel, people that have pursued us, people that represent and have developed a very nefarious lifestyle and are threatening to us. So they're threatening to us, and therefore there's a mitzvah under certain conditions to take an initiative. There are conditions. Even then, according to the Rambam, we give them a chance to mend their ways before we go and do what we have to do. Now, in this war with Midian in this week's Parsha, we're told that there's a position that in the battle to surround them only from 3 sides, not from 4 sides. And there's a discussion in the Sifri, is that necessary? Is it an option? One position holds you can't surround them from 4 sides. But I want to give you the Rambam's take and the Ramban's take, that's Maimonides and Nachmanides, on this discussion, according to that position, that you should only surround them from 3 sides. Leave the 4th route as an avenue of escape. The Ramban says it's an act of mercy. Because even in war, as I mentioned earlier, there are conditions. And we try, as it were, to try and reduce our sense of being a warrior. We have to be a warrior for the moment, but don't let that overtake your personality. You have to have a sense of mercy as well. The Rambam says leaving the 4th Avenue as a route of escape is not a mitzvah. According to the Ramban, Nachmanides, if it's in order to ameliorate the sense of warrior, then it's a mitzvah. If it's not, according to the Rambam, it's just good strategy. Don't surround somebody from 4 sides, because when you surround from 4 sides, he's going to resist harder. So usually, it'll be counterproductive. And we have seen small numbers that were surrounded, and they had nothing to lose. So they fought with abandon, and they were able to win over greater numbers. So it's counterproductive. This is the analysis of the difference of opinion between the Rambam and the Ramban on whether or not according to that position that you only surround from 3 sides, whether it's a mitzvah or it's not a mitzvah, it's just good strategy. In what we would call an elective war, there are certain exemptions that are given later on in the Torah. The exemptions are somebody who's just married, somebody who just planted a vineyard, somebody who built a new home. They're exempt. There's a negative exemption, somebody who's afraid, somebody who's frightened, so his fear will create a certain aura of fear amongst the others in his immediate environment, and that could spread. And some understand that's a reason that he should be exempted, because he's fearful. Now, it doesn't mean that somebody who's not fearful doesn't have any fear. It's what's dominant and what does he project. Anybody that doesn't have a certain amount of fear when facing death is not a reasonable person, is not just that he controls it. He suppresses it. It's not what is dictating to him how to behave. It's all the difference in the world. Whether the fear becomes dominant, that leads to a certain kind of cowardice. And that's contagious, especially in moments of war. Why would these three people be exempted? Well, we began earlier by saying that when somebody goes to war, how many of you have read Kipling, Rudyard Kipling? Remember how Kipling talks about war, that it's the moment of truth, the moment of somebody becoming the man that he should be, which is a long, long heritage. It goes back to Shakespeare, it goes back to Italian writer that they feel influenced, to Castigliani, the sense of the courtier, the nobleman whose prime occupation, again and again, is to be a man in moments of war. That's his prime calling. Life is all about honor, and honor is about how you acquit yourself on the battlefront. Means killing others, as long as it's done in a fair fashion. There's a fellow that wrote a book, Maurice Samuel, called The Gentleman and the Jew. He develops a thesis based on this root difference of the ideal of the gentleman. The ideal of the gentleman is rooted in the premise that life has no inherent, essential meaning. It's a game. When it's a game, it becomes aesthetics. And just like there is aesthetics in a painting, or in a poem, or in a piece of music, there's an aesthetic in the game of life. There's doing it more beautifully, more nobly, because that's all we have. That's all that separates us from the animals if life has no inherent meaning. If there is no soul, and this is rooted in a Greek conception, and the greatest aesthetic pleasure is to achieve acts of heroism on the sports field. Again and again, the British have said that World War I, World War II were won on the soccer fields of Eton. The sense of pressing oneself to achieve, to accomplish, that's the good, that's what makes you noble, that's what you can achieve heroism through that. And being the hero, then you're going to be a more well-placed person in the society, in the hierarchy of the system. Why do we create systems? Why do we create hierarchies? Why do we have a sense of nobility? Could be it's just accidental that we're born that way in a mechanistic worldview. It just happened to be that way, but it is that way. And once it is that way, the striving for that nobility is the greatest satisfaction that we can have and the greatest good that we can have. Churchill in World War II, I remember, was quoted, I think it's even in his biography, it was quoted, just because you have to kill somebody doesn't mean you can't be a gentleman about it. So Maurice Samuel develops the following, beginning way back, going through medieval times, the tournament, the duel. You insulted me, and therefore I challenge you to a duel. As long as it's a fair fight, I can kill you. It's fair. Both pistols are loaded, or the swords are of equal length. Legitimate. Because that's the game. Life is a game. That's all we have that gives us some sense of dignity, some sense of significance. The Jew comes along in history and says, wait a minute. Because this fellow insulted you, you're going to kill him? That's not a crime that deserves death. And if he's an evil person, you're dealing with Hitler or with Stalin, so you don't need a fair fight. Shoot him in the back. Because he's evil, and he's killed millions of people. And he's going to kill millions more. So if you have the opportunity to do away with him, do away with him. So it's not about fairness. Fairness is a game. Fairness is an invented system of synthetic dignity. What life is about, is there some good and evil? Is there essential good and evil in the world? The Jew claims yes. And that we can access that. And that many of us are born with a deeper sense of that being as an a priori truth and reality in our lives. There is good and evil. What is that good and evil? Spend some time in Osameach, you may find out. But the tournament, the evil, it's the cowboy movie. Right? We're going to showdown at OK Corral. As long as we're both armed. I can shoot, you can shoot. What's evil is to not play the game according to the rules. Game. It's game or not game. I remember I grew up in New York, went to study in Baltimore, the yeshiva in Baltimore. There were a lot of fellas from the South and the Midwest. We went out to play basketball Erev Shabbos. As a New Yorker that had been trained in the schoolyards and parks of New York, I was elbowing for position underneath the backboards to be able to get the rebound. And they were shocked, these Southerners and Midwesterners, about somebody elbowing for position. They couldn't understand what was happening. And they expressed their shock. I remember looking at them and saying, what do you think this is, a game? You use every ounce and every bit of tactic verging on violence in order to win. Because it's about honor. Tennyson writes about that. He quotes, Samuel quotes him, Kipling, Tennyson. It's all about honor. That's the ultimate, because honor is what we have invented and imposed and donned. It's the garb of what differentiates us from the animals. And we think that we have a need to make us other than the animals. And the Jew says that it's not what it's all about. There is good and evil. Human being has a soul, and there's a purpose to his existence. Now I'll give you an illustration of a source for the Jewish worldview. I once heard this fellow, Maurice Samuel, lecture in Baltimore. I'm talking about 60 years ago. Most of you guys don't remember that. And after his lecture, he was at the Y in Baltimore. I went over to him and asked him, obviously wasn't a religious Jew, but he wasn't wearing a yarmulke. And some of his quotes he had mangled about some of the sources, but he was a genuine intellectual. He wrote another book, by the way, which is very worthwhile reading, The Professor and the Fossil. He took out after Toynbee, the British historian, who called the Jews a fossilized people. That's an interesting person. In any event, I heard him lecture on this theme of the gentleman and the Jew. And I went over to Mr. Samuel after the lecture, and I said to him, how do you define yourself? What kind of Jew? Because I find a lot of the ideas that you've expressed sit well with sources in the Torah and from a Talmudic point of view. He admittedly had never mastered the skills. He was a Romanian Jew, brought up in England in very poor, academically, culturally, and economically poor environment. But he had deep love for his Jewishness, and the Jews had a sensitivity to the sources even when they didn't understand them. It's fascinating how he describes it. In any event, I asked him, the ideas that you express are very close to Talmudic sources. How do you define yourself? And without missing a beat, he said to me, I guess I'm a non-practicing observant Jew. I met a number of those since then. Non-practicing observant Jew. Okay, let's go to a source in the Torah for this differentiation. What's the differentiation? Gentleman or Jew? What is gentleman? Gentleman means the imposing of a certain system of dignity and set of rules for the sake of offering a challenge, either physically on the soccer field, the cricket field, the baseball field, or at war, or in a duel. That's all we have, is to learn to excel. In a sense, it echoes what the fellow said when he climbed Everest. We mentioned that. Who was the fellow who climbed Everest? Okay, I keep telling guys, you people have to come to Osamer to improve your secular education. Hillary, pretty good. There was somebody else that climbed it with him. A Sherpa guide that got no billing, and that was part of the nasty prejudice because Hillary was a nobleman. He was an aristocrat, and he schlepped all the way there to climb it, but the Sherpa guide lived around the corner, and he's the one who helped him get up there. Norgay Tenzing was the Sherpa guide. Interestingly enough, by the way, the 30 years afterwards, they found the body of the first man who attempted to climb Everest. There was a guy named Mallory, a Britisher, also a nobleman. Mallory, according to the experts and the situation, the position of the body, the experts said he probably reached the top and then fell coming down. So they said to Hillary, could be you're not the first guy that made it to the top of Everest. To which Hillary replied, I think climbing Everest is not just about going up, it's about coming down. You have to be able to get to the peak, but you have to be able to make it down. Mallory didn't make it down. Okay, but Everest was climbed. Hillary, probably the first man. When Hillary was asked, why did you climb it? What was his answer? Because it was there. What does that mean? That means the challenge, the feat, the nobility, the heroism. That's what it's all about. To stretch myself, expand my horizons, and therefore I've proven my mettle. That's what it's all about. Okay. Let's look at a source. Noach comes out according to the Torah. Noach comes out of the ark, plants a vineyard, makes wine, gets drunk. Few versions of what happened, but he embarrassed himself, was further compounded by his son, Chom, his grandson, Canaan. While the situation is trying to be solved, two of the brothers, Shem and Yefet, finally solved the problem by covering him up in his nakedness. You look at the verses, there are 5 verbs in the sentence. Vayikach Shem v'Yefet, v'yikach, and they took. It's a similar, v'yasimu al Shem shneim, they put it on their shoulders, they walk backwards. so that they shouldn't see, and they covered him over. Only the first verb, took, is in the singular, but it's talking about two people. All the rest of the verbs are in plural. So the Medrash says that Shem took the initiative in this mitzvah. Yefet joined in at a second point. Okay, the analysis of why. Why is that? Why did it happen that way? If Yefet was willing to do it, why was he? He was just lazy? Why did he wait to let Shem do it? So the Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Berlin, the last 100 years, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Berlin said the following. There are two worldviews. There's a worldview of the Greeks, the aesthetic, and the worldview of the Jews. Yefet has the Greek view. Shem has the Torah view. The Torah view is that it's sinful what Noah slid into, and it's sinful to leave him in that state, is compounding the sin. So it has to be corrected. Yefet looks at it and says, very unappealing, unattractive. It's offensive to my dignity that my father should look like that. Dignity. Shem, it's a mitzvah to correct it. So what's the difference if it's a mitzvah or if it's because of dignity? If it's a mitzvah, I want to be the one to help correct it. Because if it's a mitzvah, then I'm working from a premise that a mitzvah impacts me and my soul and provides nourishment for my soul. The nutrients that my soul thrives on are mitzvahs. That's his starting point. If that's true, then Shem wants to initiate the mitzvah. Yefet looks at it and says, that's not my point of view. My point of view is just that it's offensive to see my father in that state. If Shem can do it alone, let him do it alone. I couldn't care less. I want the situation solved. I don't want to be the solver. I don't have to be the one that corrects the situation. But along the way, it's a little bit acrobatic, walking backwards because they don't want to look at the father's nakedness. So Yefet decides, well, it seems to me he's going to need my help to get this done. So he joins in. So Netziv extrapolates from that there are times in history, and the verse actually says that the aesthetic can be harnessed in the service of the good. We can have the aesthetic contribute towards achieving the good. And there are times where they may be at loggerheads. They may have different agendas. Sometimes this way, sometimes that way. In fact, the blessing that is given to Yefet is that he will get this sense of aesthetics. Yaft Elokim liyefet. That's the Yefet's progeny are the Greeks. That's Western civilization. And that can be harnessed in the service of the good. Yes, it's ideal. But no, not necessarily true. There are times when, for the sake of the good, we have to suffer that which is less than aesthetic. Ideal world? Yeah, of course. But the world isn't always ideal. The world is full of quirks. Bobby Thompson's home run in 1951 would not have been a home run in Ebbets Field. Polo Grounds was 273 feet on the left field line, and it hugged the left field line. Ebbets Field was 348. The world is quirky. And quirkiness means that you have to have heads-up ability to respond at times and to innovate. Do we prefer utilizing, capturing the beauty? Yeah, but it isn't always easily accessible. Let's come back. I said there are 4 categories of exemption from a war, which is an elective war. What are the criteria for elective war? It's a long discussion. We'll have to have that. It's a shame you have that with some of your Rabbis, or we could have it another time. But there are criteria, and remember, always in a merciful fashion. But not only before you go to war, during the war. By exempting these 3 people symbolize that war is a nasty alternative. It's second best. Right? We just described a position that's the moment of truth. Man needs a good war to prove himself. Hemingway, Mencken. That's when a man becomes a man. And they're digging into Tennyson and Kipling and Shakespeare and Calistigiani. Because that's the real man. That's the cowboy. Showdown at OK Corral. That's the moment of truth. The Jew says, no, that's not really the way it is. It's what we call a bidiyavad. It's second best. It's a contingency plan. It's not the preferred reality. The preferred reality is peace and people living together. And even in the moment of war, don't forget that. So how do I not forget that? How do I stay reminded of that? By exempting people who symbolize creativity to be productive rather than destructive. That they're exempt is just got married, planted a vineyard, built a new home. Symbolically, psychologically, to surround myself with a consciousness that war is about something that I'd rather it wouldn't be there on the ground than in place. I don't seek it out to prove my mettle. It's not my only channel, the channel of achieving dignity and honor. It's second best. I'm doing it, I have to do it right. But it's not the preferred plan. There's another halacha later on in Deuteronomy. You'll find that a man has to carry around a little shovel in the warrior, to attend to his hygienic needs. Why? Don't become an animal. Dignity, yeah, but dignity means the significance of dignity is only if a human being in fact has a soul, and then there's good and evil, and that's what it's about. And I'll end with this. There was a British philosopher, not all that long ago, Isaiah Berlin, wrote a very, very seminal essay, which quoted a lot afterwards, called The Hedgehog and the Fox. Maybe The Fox and the Hedgehog. You remember, Guy? Hedgehog and the Fox, okay. Hedgehog is a porcupine. He was British, he called it a hedgehog. And he used that as a symbol. It actually was a quote from Arthalakis, a Greek philosopher, that the different approaches of how they do battle, the hedgehog and the fox. The fox has a whole bag of tricks, does something different every time. He's clever, he's sneaky, he's creative in trying to get to his prey or trying to beat his pursuers. The hedgehog has one strategy: roll up in a ball and put out his quills. So use that, and probably it's what Articulus had in mind, but Isaiah Berlin used it very deftly in symbolizing 2 kinds of intellectuals. That there are intellectuals that have a lot of different ideas, and each one is a one-time stand. It's like throwaway dishes, right? Plastic dishes. Use it now and then just toss it away afterwards. And then there are intellectuals that have a comprehensive thesis of how to view life. And they have a certain theme of how they see the world. And everything fits into that. It's what astronomers used to call GUTS, grand unifying theories. Okay, so that's Isaiah Berlin's essay. And he gives illustrations of, he gives some complicated illustrations. I believe he has Tolstoy, he said, was really a fox, and he was posing as a hedgehog. Anyway, it was very interesting, beautifully done. Isaiah Berlin reported that he met Edmund Wilson, the American literary critic, and Wilson said to him, all Jews are hedgehogs. They all have a need on one level, consciously or unconsciously, to fit everything in to one overarching thesis. I think Wilson was right, because every Jew has another dimension of the sense of urgency for some grand unifying theory, which we call Torah, and whether he repressed it or didn't repress it, on the subliminal level, on the unconscious level, that a priori sensitivity is there, and that's why he has a linkage to this sense of the good, not just the beautiful. Again, I'm not saying that they necessarily have to be at loggerheads, but that's the bracha. And finally, if you look in the Chumash, the reward that Yefet joined later, right? He joined later to help cover his father Noach. So he gets the reward in future battles that there'll be burial. Shem gets the reward of tzitzis. That's what the Mishnah, the Gemara say. Fits very beautifully, because what's burial? The carcass of a dead animal you leave decay out in the field. You don't go and bury it. It's not dignified for us to see a human being in that state. So that's burial. War, an end in itself. Honor, dignity. But let's bury he who is no longer capable of that heroism and dignity. But we don't expect it because he's dead. Tzitzis, there's no mitzvah in the Torah, from the Torah, before rabbinic legislation kicks in, there's no mitzvah in the Torah for me to go and buy a pair of tzitzis. If I happen to be wearing a four-cornered garment, then I should put on tzitzis. That's the mitzvah. Rabbinically, and it's a discussion why, we position ourselves to incur that responsibility. That's being proactive. Being proactive is what Shem did when he took the initiative to cover his father. He was proactive. Why? Because it's a mitzvah. What does a mitzvah mean? That it provides nourishment, nutrients for my soul. So I want to be the expediter. You want to join me? Great. But I want to be part of it. Aesthetics? Yes or no? Either it's necessary or it's not necessary in order to create that sense of dignity. I have to end at this point, but as I've said in the past, anybody wants to continue any of this conversation, we're always open and we'll find time.